everyone. Hope y'all are having a good day today. Because one, look at how nice it is outside. Look at how nice it is outside. But, which we are gonna go flying today. Whoops, let me fix my exposure. There we go. But, so a few videos back, I said that I was going to be releasing a video talking about my 6S freestyle setup. Well, today is that day. Here it is. So this is the quad that I've been flying in pretty much all my freestyle videos for the past few months. Some things have changed, but I just want to give y'all a general rundown of all the parts that are on this machine. So let's jump right into it. So starting off with the frame, this is an Impulse-RC Reverb frame. It's one of the best freestyle frames on the market. I first started flying it back in January of 2018. I've had a lot of time with this frame and I absolutely love it. One, it just looks amazing. Two, I love the fact that it comes with these antenna mounts for our 2.4 gigahertz radio antennas. The video transmitter antenna mount is really simple. It's just two zip ties with some double-sided sticky tape underneath, and it can fit everything from a full size to mini size to micro sized cameras. You can buy these little 3D printed adapters right here to fit micro cams. But yeah, it's a really good frame. It's a really stable platform for video if you're just trying to be smooth, but if you want to do all the kind of acrobatic stuff that freestyle pilots do, this frame is great for that. So for the motors, these are the Emax Eco motors. These are the 2306 1700 kV motors. I like these motors for a wide variety of reasons. Number one is the price. These motors are like $11.99 a piece. Number two, they use N48 magnets instead of N52, so they are very, very smooth. There is no cogging in these motors whatsoever. These are one of, if not the smoothest motors on the market, which means that you get little to no mid-throttle oscillations with these motors, and they are spinning the Ethix S3 props. And yeah, this motor prop combo is perfect for freestyle. For electronic speed controllers, or ESC for short, I'm running the Race Day Quads 30 amp 32-bit BL Heli 32 ESCs. I really like these ESCs. They're like, again, $11.99 for a piece. And then I've also got these 35 volt 470 microfarad low ESR capacitors on there. I bought these from Race Day Quads. They're really small in this heat shrink. This is a 13mm heat shrink from Race Day Quads. I'm using single ESCs instead of a 4-in-1 because I have not found a 4-in-1 that is reliable for a 5-inch. I've tried a few of them and I just keep popping them left, right, and center. I've been flying these ESCs for about 3 months, never had any issues. I've been flying these same ESCs on another Reverb of mine for like 7 or 8 months. Again, no issues whatsoever. I've yet to see one of these 30 amps pop, so I'm going to continue using them. So the XC60 is connected to a power distribution board. The power distribution board and the flight controller are separate in this build. I do that just because I want to isolate the flight controller from as much electrical noise as possible. So for the power distribution board, or PDB, I'm running the matek fchub 6S. This has a 5-volt regulator and a 10-volt regulator built in. It also supports VBAT, and it has a current sensor built into it, so you can just wire it up to your flight controller and get all of your battery information from that. For my flight controller in here, this is the CLRacing F7 V2 MPU6000 edition. There are two versions of this flight controller. The first version comes with dual gyros, so you can kind of pick which one you want to use, or you can just buy the single one that comes with, again, just the good old-fashioned MPU6000 gyro. I really, really like this thing. It's got plenty of UARTs, and I'm not going to be switching anytime soon. For receivers, I am still rocking the X4R S-Bus. This receiver is is a year and a half old. I have swapped antennas, but if you go back through my videos, like I actually built this Reverb at Quad Camp, and this is still the original receiver that I had with me at Quad Camp. I have not switched from it. The X4R S-Bus is an extremely reliable receiver, and I really, really like it. Like I said before, and I have the antennas into these little antenna tube mounts. These mounts are really good, and I really, really like them. For cameras, I've switched over to the Foxeer Predator. This is the version 4. I'm still working out some camera settings that I like, but I switched to it because it has the best combination of low light sensitivity and being able to fly in day. You can kind of get the best of both worlds, just like with one camera setting. I'm just trying to dial back the saturation and the green flash I get when I do a hard backflip. Every time I do a backflip, the screen will flash green for a brief second, and then it comes back, and that's kind of annoying, but the fact that I don't have to worry about the camera just going to complete useless in when it gets dark out is something that I really, really like. So this is hard to see because it's buried under here, but I have the VTX double-sided tape to the top, or to the bottom of my top plate here, and then I've got some electrical tape going around it to make sure it's extra secure. This is the Rushtank Ultimate Plus VTX. I went with this one because it does 800 milliwatts. I can power my camera off of it, so I get super clean video, and it has an automatic gain control mic built into the VTX. I love this microphone. It is fantastic. So this is going to be my new default VTX for all of my freestyle builds. I ran a Tramp for a really, really long time, and the Tramp was also another really good video transmitter. But if you want to run the Predator and still get audio, I think the Rushtank VTX is really good. It works really well. And for my video transmitting antenna, I went on a little bit of a splurge, and I got the TBS Triumph Pro. This is the V1. They've since come out with the V2. I got the V1 because it's just a little bit longer. This is 86 millimeters long, and the new Triumph is like 83 millimeters. I wanted something a little bit longer to be able to kind of poke out above the battery that sits on top of here, and I can notice a difference. When I ran this antenna paired with my Triumph, no, I'm sorry, when I ran this antenna paired with the Immersion RC Tramp, it works really well. I can get better video in areas where I can't get as good video if I run a cheaper antenna. So any one of the Triumph lines from TBS, these are really good antennas. I highly recommend them. On top here, I've got some Ethix battery straps. These are some of the lightest battery straps on the market, which is why I use them. Then to help save a little bit more weight, I've switched over to the Ummagrip Lite. Same thing as Ummagrip, just a little bit thinner, a little bit lighter. Also continuing on with the front, I've got a Hero 5 Session mount, and then instead of a Session, I am rocking, well, I'm not going to take it out anyway, but I've got the Runcam 5 because I kind of smashed my Session, and this, I wanted to go with this because I wanted to keep that cube style camera. This thing is very, very light. It only weighs 56 grams, and I can definitely tell a flight performance increase in switching to this camera. I am going to do a video where I go over settings to get GoPro Super View out of this thing. You can get Super View out of it, but at least in my experience, you have to have access to DaVinci Resolve 15, which is a free video editing firmware. That's going to be in another video, but it's part of the build, so I just wanted to include it. So last but not least, we've got batteries, and as you can see, I've got a lot of batteries charging because, well, I'm going out flying after I get done shooting this. But this is the Pyrodrone Graphene Series Team Edition 1100 milliamp hour 6S packs. This, to my knowledge, this is the lightest 6S battery on the market that you can reasonably put on a 5-inch quad. This battery weighs 176 grams, so it offers a really great power to weight ratio. I can fly almost 4 minutes on this battery, 4 minutes going crazy on the throttle. Wee, 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 all that jazz. Yeah, I love it. This is my go-to battery for Success Freestyle. So that's all the parts that I'm using on my Freestyle build, but rather than just ending the video here, like I said, I've got batteries charging. So we are going to go to the tracks. That is 1, away from all soft targets, and 2, should be dry because we got a crap ton of rain yesterday and the ground is still kind of wet and muddy, and I don't want to risk crashing and flying and frying any of my electronics. So we're going to go to the tracks because I have reason to assume that the ground is going to be much, much drier there. Alright guys, so this is where I show you guys just kind of how smooth this thing is. Like I said, this is harshest lighting conditions, and there are some oscillations. I'm looking at this on my Mac before I edit it in, and yeah, there's some. Now I will say the wind was blowing a little bit on this day, but it's pretty darn smooth. I mean, you can't really notice them unless you really pay attention. And in the acro, as soon as I pick up throttle a little bit, yeah, there's just like no jitter whatsoever when I'm doing all these acro moves. So right here I'm going to fly down along the rails, and it's pretty darn smooth. And especially this is really smooth in really harsh sunlight. If you were flying in like golden hour situation, you wouldn't see any oscillations in your video whatsoever. It would be absolute buttery smooth. Or if you're running something like the GoPro Hero 7 or doing real steady, again, it's going to be really, really smooth. Okay guys, so it's been a few days since I shot the footage that you just saw, and I've kind of acquired a cold, so my throat's a little, or my voice is a little bit deeper than it normally is, but I do want to wrap up this video. Earlier, one thing I overlooked when discussing the parts for this thing, there's 2 very important things that I forgot to mention. Number 1 are these 4 center bolts right here. The ones that come with the Reverb stock are not long enough to go through this entire, sandwich of carbon plus the little press nut in between the PDB and the carbon, as well as go through the PDB and get attached to the little nylon standoffs that are inside. So what you need to do if you want to build this specific frame is you need to go to a Home Depot, and you need to buy 4 M3 by 14 cap head screws. I think it's like $1 or $2 for a pack of 4. They're really, really inexpensive. It's not, I don't think it's that hard. You can do it, as everything is being shipped to you. Another thing you will need is you will need an XT60 connector, and Race Day Quads does sell a little pre-soldered XT60 pigtail on 14 gauge wire, which is exactly what this is. It's not the exact same thing as the one they sell, but it's pretty close. And then you will also need 18 gauge wire and 22 gauge wire for the power wires connecting your electronic speed controllers to the power distribution board. And then you will also need 22 gauge wire for the signal wire going from the PWM pad on the ESC to the signal pad on the flight controller. Another thing too that I've done here, speaking of that I also want to point out, is this flight controller is technically, I'm sorry, not the flight controller, the PDB is actually meant to be rotated with this XT60 coming out the back and not the side. So the motor mapping is still the same, but I remedied this problem not by doing the resource remapping that's in Betaflight, because I've never been able to get that to work properly, but instead I do what I call a mechanical resource remap. Okay, so this is just a quick little diagram that I drew of this PDB that I'm using. And you can do this with anything where you have to solder motor wires to either a PDB, or you could even do this with a 4-in-1 ESC. So how this XT60 is laid out the Betaflight motor layout is, motor 1, motor 2, motor 3, motor 4, kind of like this little Z turned on its side. However, I've turned the XT60 on its side. So now motor 2 is the new motor 1. So how do you remedy this? Well, like I mentioned before, one way to do it is to do Betaflight resource remapping, or you can do what I do, is let's say up here we've got this is our, FC, and it's got, your motor pads, hold on a second. It's got, motors 1, 2, 3, 4 right here. So what you do is your motor wire comes up and it's soldered to a point right here on output number 2. Well, that trace goes to trace number 2 right here. Then what you do is you take a wire and you solder it from trace 2 to the one pad on your flight controller. So now when you give your quad an input, the information travels down this wire to this 2 trace, but because we've wired it this way, this 2 trace still goes to trace 2, but trace 2 is now where motor 1 is, and motor 1 does what you tell it to do without having to do resource remapping. And you do this per every motor. So now motor 4 should be a new number 2. So you would find wire number 4, trace 4, and wire it to the 2 position on your flight controller. Motor 1 is now the new motor 3. So you find you go to trace 3. I'm sorry. Trace 1, wire it to motor 3, and last but not least, 4. This is motor 4. 4 to 3, wire trace 3 to motor 4, and you should be good to go. This is how you do resource remapping without having to actually go into the Betaflight configurator. Like I said, I have tried to do resource remapping on the CLI. I've followed all of the video tutorials done by Bardwell, anybody else, etc. And just doing it through Betaflight has never worked. This has worked consistently for me every time, and this is what I recommend you do if you decide to build it this way. Alright, so I hope that made a little bit more sense. Now let's go back to wrapping up this quad. I needed to make that setup because that's really crucial to how this thing is supposed to work. Because, yeah, if you get it wired up wrong, this thing's going to fly wonky, and then you're just going to be frustrated. And this is targeted towards newcomers. So let's go over the price of this thing. And this aircraft, as you see it here, in this configuration, minus the cost of the battery and the cost of the GoPro mount and whatever camera you decide to mount on this thing, is $363.48. Give or take a few. When I did this calculation, I forgot to calculate in the cost of like I said, these 4 M3x14 cap head screws that you need, as well as the ESC wires. The XT60 is wired into that, so realistically you can expect this to cost $365 roughly. The weight of this guy, as you see here, at least the way I have it configured, is about 633 grams, give or take a few. And I kind of like that weight. It's got enough weight to where it has enough momentum so that when you chuck it over something, the inertia that you build up can carry you over an object, but it's not so heavy that you're breaking something every time you smash into an object. Okay, so now I want to take you under the hood and let's look at the firmware settings for this quad. I was going to do this in a separate video, but this build wouldn't be complete without the settings that I've come up with for it, so I decided to include it in this video. Yes, I understand this video is getting pretty long, but this is important and I wanted to include it in this video, so let's get started. So, main page, nothing really to see on this. I don't have my accelerometer on at this time, so let's moving on. Ports, this is how I have everything wired up. I have my smart port telemetry on UART1. My VTX remote control, which for the Rushtank is TBS Smart Audio. I have that wired up to UART3. And then my receiver S-Bus is wired up to UART5. There are 6 UARTs in total on this flight controller, which is the CLRacing F7 V2 with an MPU6000 gyro. Configuration, pretty standard fare. I am using D-Shot 600. I'm not doing D-Shot 1200. D-Shot 600 is smoother with D-Shot 1200. I noticed I get a little bit more oscillations, a little bit more bounce back. D-Shot 600, I have none of those issues whatsoever. Arming has been disabled because, well, my accelerometer has been disabled. AK8K for gyro in PID loop frequency. S-Bus serial receiver. Pretty standard fare, telemetry output, air mode, OSD, ESC sensor, or well, that's not turned on, but anti-gravity and dynamic filter, all of that is turned on. And then all of my beeper settings are disabled except for the D-Shot buzzer, which is set up right here. Also, I guess I should point out the firmware that I'm using is the Emax Lite 0.1.0, so the very first version firmware. So this is what I'm going to recommend that you run. I haven't had any issues with this firmware. Power and battery. So for this particular flight controller, to get an accurate voltage scale reading, you're going to have to bump it way up from stock 161. That gives me an accurate voltage scale readout. And then this number at 179, this is the current sensor number that the matek hub comes with. So if you look on their product description, they give you the current sensor scale for that, and this is that scale, 179. All right, PID tuning. Now, this is the whole meat of the matter. This is what I have been messing with the most, trying to adjust these numbers. And I really like the way Emax Lite has this set up. You've got PID, rate, and filter settings all in separate tabs, so it keeps everything nice and organized. So, these are my PIDs, okay? These are my 6S PIDs. I have little to no bounce back on flips and rolls. I have no bounce back, or very little to none mid-throttle oscillations. My feed forward is at 0 because I'm running feathered PIDs. If you decide to run a frame that's maybe a little bit different from the Reverb, I suggest lowering all of these PID values by about 2, maybe even 3, and then work your way up from there. If your quad feels a little mushy, then just bump them up by 1 until it feels good. iTerm lowered these. I might bump these up just a little bit to help deal with some of the wind, and then my D values are pretty low. I like them low because what I found is that the higher you have D, yes, it's going to help you handle prop wash, but it's also going to make the quad feel very numb and kind of mushy. I like these numbers exactly where they are. Moving on over to the EMU settings, these numbers, EMU boost and EMU limit. There's a couple more that I'll get into, but I want to talk about these. These are not stock. I have adjusted these. So according to this, adds a non-linear boost to air, yada, yada, yada. What helped me, though, was this one. A high EMU boost with a low EMU limit can give you a snappy feeling near the center of the stick, which is I personally want. And so for me, what I found, this feels the good. This kind of like half ratio where the EMU boost limit is kind of half, or I'm sorry, the EMU limit is half of the EMU boost. I like that. I don't know if that'll work universally with any of these settings, but for me, this feels the best, so that's what I recommend that you start from. Anti-gravity, that's on just to help kind of with the nose or the attitude. It won't go any lower than 1.1, so I just leave this alone. I don't use iTerm Relax. Feathered PIDs, I keep these on by default because that's what they recommend. They meaning Emax Lite. So, yeah, last thing I want to talk about, well, I'll show you my rates. These are my rates. I've heard people comment on, that my rates are really fast. They're not really. I mean, it's just over 1,000 degrees per second. What makes it fast is actually an optical illusion from the GoPro stretch that I do with, well, when I had GoPro Super View and now even with the Runcam 5. Super View actually creates an optical illusion that makes it look like your drone is traveling faster than it actually is. It also creates an optical illusion for when you're doing snappy flips and rolls. Because of that kind of non-linear stretch that goes across the entire image, it makes your quad look like it's rotating faster than it actually is. So that's why it looks like my flips and rolls are kind of insane. Partly because, yeah, my rates are kind of high, but also because I'm using that Super View-ish stretch. TPA, I like this. These are the stock numbers. I like the fact that you can adjust TPA for each of the PIDs individually instead of it all being one thing. And my breakpoint is at 1350. Filters. This is the last setup thing I really want to talk about on here. By default, I think the gyro low pass was enabled by default. I have since turned that off. The IMUF filter settings, these numbers I have adjusted from stock. I think this was at like 32, and this was at like 3,000. I have since bumped this up to 5,000 because I think I read it on their GitHub page. If you bump this up, this actually helps you fight against mid-throttle oscillations. I'm not sure how true that is. I just know that like when I bumped this number up pretty significantly, I got less prop wash, and lowering this number will give you a sharper stick feel, which is what I was looking for. So I lowered this by kind of significant-ish margin. It was 32. I've since lowered it to 24, and I kind of like the way this feels. So if you're building this particular aircraft, any particular aircraft similar to the electronics that I use, I recommend going to this from stock. I have since left these two filters on. I may or may not. I might try turning this filter off, but I don't recommend it since I haven't done it as of the time of this video. If you're running this exact identical setup, then yes, you can get away with turning this gyro low pass filter off. If you're running anything else other than this, maybe you decided you want to try out some different motors with this setup, or maybe you want to try a different frame with this setup, definitely run this with this low pass filter on. And if your motors come down cool and your quad isn't, or cool by meaning like cool to the touch, like they're not like screaming hot when you come down from your flight, then yeah, you can turn this off. But yeah, these are my filter settings. So that's going to do it. And then, well, I'll just go through the rest of this. Receiver. This is kind of what I have in my receiver settings. I have my stick low threshold of 10, 10, and 990. And all of this is pretty much just standard fare. Modes. These are my modes. You know, my arm switches on aux 1, my beeper, and turtle mode are on aux 2, just in varying positions. And then OSD. This is how I have my OSD settings set up. My camera is set to NTSC, so this is kind of what I see in the goggles. One kind of bug I see with this is, well, I can't move this over anymore because I don't know. I can't move it over, but in the OSD, this 00, this kind of colon thing and this P, that's not there. So I just see this R2 and 2 and whatever. I wish I could shift it over a little bit more, but I can't. But yeah, so I have my low voltage warning, my average cell voltage, my total pack cell voltage, the amps I'm consuming, the milliamp hours that I've drawn, and the amount of time that I've actually been flying. So this thing won't tick up until you arm your quad. So that's pretty much it as far as my EMI flight setup. So let's swap back over to the bench and we'll wrap up this video. Well, okay, one more thing actually. Black box. This is what I have my black box set to. It's onboard flash, 2 kilohertz. My use space. This board has 32 megabits of use space, which is double any onboard flash flight controller that I've seen, but if your flight controller has like an SD card slot, then yeah, you can. This is use space is pretty much irrelevant because you can just use that SD card for forever, basically. So, okay, now that's the end of this this kind of on the computer setting thing. Let's move back over to the bench and wrap this video up. Okay, so why am I sharing this? What makes this build so special? Why? Like, okay, why would you build this? Why would you build this quad? So if you're the kind of person where, like, okay, if money is no object to you, then don't build this quad. That's not the point of this quad. If money is no object to you, just build a fully kissed out Mr. Steel Apex, the Lite Edition, and you'll be fine. And that's an important point because at one point I had a kissed out Reverb, and a kissed out Reverb basically means I was running basically all KISS electronics. KISS is a company that makes flight controllers and electronic speed controllers for mini quads. And I had the KISS FC version 1 and the KISS 24 amp ESCs. It was on 4S at the time, and I really liked the way that quad handled, but I had some trouble getting turtle mode working. I eventually got it figured out, but not before I kind of switched back to Butterfly. So I really liked the performance of KISS, but upgrading to all the better components, which is what I thought I needed, that was just way too expensive for me. I couldn't afford it. So I began to ask myself the question, what is the best possible performing drone that I can get at the lowest possible cost? So trying to find a balance between those two things, and that's really hard to do. And in addition to that, I wanted a quad that felt really good in the air, produced smooth GoPro footage or smooth HD footage, and could stay in the air as long as possible. Again, and while at the same time still being cost effective. So like not spending an outrageous sum of money on this. And I've been working on that formula for the past 8 to 9 months. Well, okay, maybe not 8 to 9. Well, yeah, like since the beginning of the year. So almost a full year I've been working on this thing. I was running 4S. I've since transitioned into 6S. And that's another thing on this build. This is not a 4S build. This is a 6S build, which means that you are going to get longer flight time. Like I said, just pushing this thing all out as far as we go. Even like when I'm on and off the throttle constantly in a wide open space, I still get over 3 minutes. If I'm flying around a bando, I can push this thing for almost 6 minutes, maybe even 6.5. So this is a really efficient setup. It feels really good in the air. It doesn't have a lot of prop wash, which actually that's another thing I meant to mention before when I listed out all the things that I wanted this thing to do. I wanted it to have very minimal prop wash, and I was able to get that through a lot of PID tuning and stuff. The PIDs that I've come up with are optimized for 6S. They're not optimized for 4S. Most stock PIDs these days, at least at the time of this video, that are available as default, they're for 4S quads and not 6S quads. So if you're the kind of person who wants a quad that is somewhat affordable to build, gives you a really good feeling in the air with minimal prop wash, and produces smooth HD footage, this is the aircraft for you. If you don't like the reverb, then you can just take the electronics that are in here and you can just put them in the frame of your choice. I mean, I've never done like an electronics swap with this thing. I mean, as I just fly the reverb, I don't have enough money to try this formula out on like every single frame out there. But yeah, figuring out a way to fit these electronics into a different frame shouldn't be that big of an issue. Like I said, like maybe if you want to try to save a little bit of money and maybe go with something like the TBS Source one or the Rotorite CL one, I'm fairly certain these electronics will fit all in there pretty cleanly. Don't quote me on that because, like I said, I've never tried it.
But in my book, this setup, as you see here, offers a really good balance between performance and cost. And that's kind of what I'm going for. So yeah, that's going to do it for the end. That's going to do it for the end of this video. If you guys like what you see here and you decide that this is the formula for you and you decide to build one, let me know what your experience is. I think you'll really, really enjoy it. So that's going to do it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye!